Resuming from our last lecture, we mentioned that the first commitment, the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, there was a promise of independent Arab state by the British in return for the Arab revolt against the Ottoman. So now let's discuss the next fateful commitment, and that one is the 1915 Constantinople Agreement, March 18, 1915. First thing is that this was a secret agreement. And basically what happened was that Britain and France give Russia the eastern part of Turkey to ensure that they are willing to keep their hands off the Arab area. That is, the eastern part of Turkey is being exchanged with Russians for the two islands that I mentioned, Mesopotamia and the Western Island. So that clearly shows that what is happening is that Britain and France are not going to give independence to Arabs after all, because they are going to keep it for themselves. So this agreement proves that Arabs were being betrayed, or at least it shows that there is very little intention of following through. And then comes the next agreement, and that one is the famous Sykes-Picot Agreement. That too is also a secret agreement, and on the basis of this agreement, what happens is that Britain and France decide to divide up the two islands between themselves. So what is happening is that the Ottoman Empire is being carved up into colonies and spheres of influence. The eastern part goes to Russia, and the rest is divided between Britain and France. Now, according to this agreement, the last one, Sykes-Picot, Lebanon, Syria, and a province of now what is now Iraq, Mosul, goes to France, whereas the Britain will get Palestine, Transjordan, and most of what is Iraq. So this confirms that Arabs are being betrayed, and they are not going to get independence. So what I'd like to show is a couple of maps where these are kind of laid out. So to see the Constantinople Agreement, you can see the red part of it. That's the 1915 agreement. That's the eastern part of Turkey that was promised to Russia by Britain and France. And then Sykes-Picot Agreement lays out the division of Arab land between France and Britain. So this one is a Sykes-Picot, so you can see that part of North Iraq originally was supposed to go to France. Later on you will see that the British actually end up taking it back. And then I like to also show you how they come up with the area for Palestine being subdivided and given to the British versus the French in the northern part. And so you can see what was happening there. So moving on, we come to the next fateful agreement, and that is the Balfour Declaration. Balfour was a Britain foreign secretary at the time, and the declaration really is in the form of a letter from Balfour, the foreign secretary, to a prominent Jew by the name of Baron Rothschild. It basically says that the Jews can have a home in ancient Judea and Samaria, but the rights of the inhabitants of the area must be respected. More specifically, The declaration was in the form of this letter that Baron Rothschild received from Balfour, and states the following: the British government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home. Notice the ambiguity, what exactly is a national home? For the Jewish people. And then it continues with the important part being, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which can prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Notice the inherent contradiction here. Promising a national home to Jews while simultaneously requiring that nothing should be done that could undermine the rights of the non-Jews. Also notice that while the Jews are referred to as people, the overwhelming majority of the area, of the people in the area, are merely referred to as non-Jewish communities, as if these people had no other identities. So now the question is, what were the British motivations for doing this? Well, there was a strategic reasons for doing that. British policymakers felt that a Jewish Palestine would secure British post-war position in the Arab world and thus protects their lifeline to India. So that was one of the reasons that they decided to do this and support the Jews, risking the ire of the Arabs. There was also political economic reasons for doing that. The idea was that it's going to be important to obtain political and financial backing of the world Jewry, which the Germans were also actively courting. So that was the two main reasons that the British decided that they're going to also issue a Balfour Declaration. So let me then sum up what is happening with these four fateful commitments. First, the British promised independence to the Arabs. Next, they join with France and negotiate secretly with Russians to get it back. Then the British and French secretly divide the Arab land between themselves. And then finally, they come up with this ambiguous Balfour Declaration, allowing Jews to create a national home in the heart of Palestine. I should mention again that initially the Jews really had been ignored by the British, largely because British viewed them as very pro-German. But now that the British wanted to, they were worried about Germans, they wanted to vote them back, so they thought in terms of doing something that would satisfy them, and of course, Balfour Declaration was going to do it. The other factor that influenced British favorable leaning to the idea of Jewish national homeland in Palestine was a very prominent Jew by the name of Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann, you will see, he will become the very first president of the state of Israel after 1948. They really liked Chaim Weizmann in large part because of his contribution to explosives and warfare. So the British were inclined to give the Jews the Balfour Declaration for these two reasons, to woo them back to Britain and also because of the very strong lobbying by Chaim Weizmann. So that's the way things are until a big event that takes place in 1917 at the world stage, and of course that's nothing other than the Bolshevik Revolution. With the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russians go straight to Arabs and inform them that they have a document in their possession that shows that they have been betrayed by Britain and France. The Arabs are really stunned. They could not believe this. They felt betrayed. So, in response, they come up. There is another document called the Declaration to the Seven. What was happening was a group of notable Syrians who had established a Syrian Unity Party. Once they learned about the Istanbul, the Constantinople secret agreement, they confronted the British and they asked them to respond to the Russian allegations and the evidence that they produced. The British response was that the Russians were lying through their teeth and that they keep reassuring the Arabs that the McMahon Hussein is still the basis for their policy. In other words, they reiterated their lie by telling the Arabs that, yes, we intend to grant independence to Arabs. But when World War I comes to an end, the truth finally comes out in 1920. And what is happening is that only 2 of the declarations out of the 4 commitments, 2 of them are getting implemented. The first, of course, is Sykes-Picot. Remember, Sykes-Picot was dividing the Arab lands between the French and the British. It's a slight modification of Sykes-Picot because the British end up taking Mosul back. And then, of course, the other one is Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was actually incorporated into the language of Balfour Declaration was incorporated into the mandate by demanding the Arabs to accept a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So instead of promised independence, the Arabs' territories are carved out as mandates, and as a result, these mandates are given back to the imperial power, and there is no independence for Arabs. So now you're beginning to understand the sources of outrage that Arabs are going to be feeling. In the meantime, Chaim Weizmann decided that he would need to meet with Faisal because he wanted to lobby for greater Jewish immigration into Palestine. The whole idea was that you had to get the Jews there if they were going to have a national home. Weizmann was a very, very charming man. Faisal actually, after being betrayed by the British, he trusted Weizmann more than he trusted the British. In their meeting with Faisal, in his meeting with Faisal, Weizmann assured Faisal that Zionists had no intention of creating a Jewish government in Palestine. And when he made that assurance to Faisal, Faisal fell for it, and he made the statement that the Jews and Arabs were brothers, and the Jews therefore have a right to settle in Palestine, but not the right to dominate them politically by governmental structure. And so this really is considered Weizmann's singular achievement in opening the path to greater migration of the Jews to Palestine and getting Faisal to actually accept that immigration to Palestine. By then, the Arabs were so disenchanted and outraged at the British that they had given up on them. So now, the only power they could look to was the United States. And this wasn't accidental. It had a lot to do with the fact that at the end of World War I, President Wilson came up with this 14-point manifesto. One of the points among these 14 points was that of national self-determination. A lot of it was intended for Europe with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire to make sure some of these Baltic states and the Eastern European countries will have independence. But the Arabs also believed that national self-determination was not limited to one continent, it applied universally. Therefore, they thought it also applies to the lower races, quote unquote. When it became obvious that neither British nor the French were interested in Arabs achieving independence, the United States took an interest in their cause, and President Wilson appointed a commission. That commission in 1919 was called King-Crane Commission, involving these two individuals, the King-Crane Commission. The commission came up with a fascinating report. Fascinating because in that report, they revealed attitudes of the people of the area towards the United States that you will not find if you were doing the survey today. In fact, you will not find if you were doing the survey after 1958. With only one exception, the attitudes of the people of the area towards the United States was extremely favorable. The commission, however, was sharply divided among themselves. Therefore, they could not come up with a single report. They wrote a majority report and a minority report. The majority report said that Arabs have every right to be independent. The people of the area want complete independence, and they want it under Sharif Hussein's son, Faisal. However, if that is not immediately possible, and they must remain under mandate, that mandate should not be given to French because they're going to end up dividing the area. If possible, it should not be given to Britain either because they pretty much will do the same, but they're not as bad as the French. But the preference of the majority was if any countries to get that mandate, the United States would be the only country that would be acceptable to the people of the area to be given the mandate because they trust the United States. In addition, and this is important, the Commission recommended a sharp curtailment of Jewish immigration to Palestine, and also the very ending of the idea of Palestine becoming a Jewish national home. So essentially what they were saying is that the Balfour Declaration should be pretty much scrapped. There was also a minority report, as I mentioned, and the minority report was interesting. First, it did not deny any of the majority report's data. What it did was to simply argue that if we, the United States, have to decide between the Arabs and the Jews, we should choose the Jews. After all, Jews are Western people, and they have been treated in a rotten way in the West. In other words, we have treated the Jews in the West in a rotten way, let the Arabs pay for it. Meanwhile, President Wilson comes down with a stroke before he can even read the report, and the commission report was really suppressed for a while. For some years it wasn't published. Its findings, if you were going to go with the majority report, and its recommendation were truly explosive, especially when you consider the domestic lobbying that was going on in this country by the Jews. At the end, the report was simply ignored. It would have entailed too high a price, too high a political price domestically to pay by any politician in the United States. It would have truly have offended the Jews. So by 1920s, instead of independence, there is the San Remo Conference that ends up officially chopping up Arab lands into mandates and then places them under the imperial powers, Britain and France.